Good morning, everyone. We are in Perek Yud Zayin of Sefer Melachim Bet. And in Perek Yud Zayin, this is a tragic Perek because this is the one in which the northern tribes are exiled to Ashur, to the locations. This is where we talk about really ultimately what we refer to as the 10 lost tribes. It happens here. And to be able to get a little bit of a picture of what's going on, I'm going to refer you to one of the handouts that I shared earlier, and that's the chronology one. I'm putting it up on screen now. Hopefully you can see it. And while there's some things in here that are subject to debate, but the big picture of it all is that we are going to be dealing with the reign of Hoshea. Hoshea's reign is outlined right in this section right here, where I put a little box around it, not too successfully. Hoshea is going to be the king of the north. He begins his reign during Achaz's time, and actually into Chizkiyahu, who we haven't gotten to yet, the next child after the Achaz's child, who is one of the great kings of the south, even though he is in an era where problems are beginning to occur. At the very same time, what we need to understand that we're going to be dealing with three Assyrian kings. We've already met Tiglath-Pileser III. After Tiglath-Pileser III comes Shalmaneser V. Now, Shalmaneser V, according to his own records and according to historians, began his reign with a number of defeats, especially around Tyre. He was unsuccessful. He didn't have the same kind of power that his father had. And then at the end, we're going to go to Sargon II. Now, Sargon II, many of us are familiar with just by going to the Oriental Institute. So that's Sargon. He didn't look like that. His face theoretically looked like that. But this was a way of displaying their power in the ancient world. And so if you ever go to the Oriental Institute, you see Sargon all over the place. He's really big. And the reason why Sargon II is important is because he's actually the one who is going to take us out, take the northern tribes out into exile, even though he's not mentioned in this parak. There's one reference that's possible that he's being mentioned, but he's not there. And in terms of the dates, we know that the exile of the northern tribes occurred somewhere around 721, 722 BCE. And so that's this place right here. Okay, that's that space that we're having. And that's right when the end of Hoshea's reign, Shalmaneser V, the end of his reign, the beginning of Sargon, and it's actually going to be in the time of Chizkiyahu, even though we don't deal with Chizkiyahu yet. This is that background piece. So remember, Tiglath-Pileser is powerful. His son in the beginning is not as powerful, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II will be powerful and will take the Jewish people from the north out into exile. We're dealing with the reign of Achaz, who was evil, if you recall, and we are also dealing with Hoshea. And that's where we pick up the parak, and just to get started with Pasuk Aleph in the very first problem we encounter. Bishnat 12 la'achaz melech Yehuda. It was
a question though.
Yes.
We already talk about an exile taking place.
There were, if you remember, a number of stages to exile. This is the exile. The initial exile took place with the leadership, with many of the leaders of the north. But this is the real exile. We had dealt with that, if you remember, in a Rashi from Sefer Yeshayahu, which we had said there were three phases to the exile.
Oh.
Pasuk Aleph. Bishnat 12 la'achaz melech Yehuda. It was the 12th year of Achaz's reign. Malach Hoshea ben Elam v'shomron al Yisrael teisha shanim. Hoshea ben Elam reigned for 9 years. Now, Hoshea ben Elah, if you recall, was the one who had assassinated his predecessor, Pekach ben Remaliah. The assassination of Pekach ben Remaliah, which takes place back in Perek Tetvav, was most likely an outcome of their defeat by the Assyrians. Now, again, if you remember, the Assyrians came in, and we talked about this last week, that Achaz had made an alliance with the Syrians, with the Assyrians, with Ashur, that the north, Pekach ben Remaliah, had made an alliance with Egypt and apparently also with Edom and the Plishtim, because they were trying to create a coalition to stand up to the emerging empire of Ashur. They wanted the southern kingdom to be part of it, Pekach ben Remaliah. He did not join in that coalition, and therefore we find that Ashur came to his aid. They first took care of Aram, conquering Damascus. We saw that last week, killing the king. And in Perek Tetvav, we talked about the fact that they had attacked the north and conquered large swaths of the north. At that moment, most likely, the Hoshea ben Elam staged a coup against Pekach ben Remaliah. This is back 2 Prakim ago. He assassinates Pekach ben Remaliah and he takes over as king. According to the Assyrian documents that we have today, and we have many of them, there's a number of them that were found, tablets, and also steels. Hoshea ben Elam was put into place by by Tiglath-Pileser III. He was actually made the king of the north. And as a result of being made the king of the north, we now know what his relationship is to Ashur. Hopefully, I haven't lost anyone on this little bit of history along the way. This opening pasuk is a little bit problematic, and the reason why it's a little problematic, because the years don't work out exactly. And by the way, the years really don't work out, and that document of chronology that I shared with you, that timeline, is an attempt by modern scholars not only to work out the different years that you find in Perek Tetvav, Perek Tet Zayin, and Perek Yud Zayin, but also the years as found in the Babylonian and Assyrian documents as well. Yeah.
I just don't recall where I saw or are you referring to Hoshea ben Elah being an agent of Ashur?
Oh, that is from the Assyrian documents.
So why would our text omit that?
We don't know, but if you think
why is it important then?
Well, what will be important is in this story, in terms of the relationships that are taking place.
Mm.
So our text, there's a lot of detail that the text omits. The timing actually works very well for this to happen. Because if you think about it, the northern kingdom back in Perek Tetvav loses all of that land to the king of Ashur, to Tiglath-Pileser III. When they lose all of that land right afterwards, if you remember, then you have the coup. It's pasuk lamed. It literally is, if you just to go back for a minute to Perek Tetvav, if you remember, pasuk Chavtet said, "B'yemei Pekach Melech Yisrael bad Tiglath-Pileser Melech Ashur." That Tiglath-Pileser III came. ויקח את עיון ואת אבל ואת מרחה ואת ינוח ואת קדש ואת חצור ואת גלעד ואת הגלילה. Kol Eretz Naphtali v'Yaglem Ashur had the first exile. Vayikshor Kesher Hoshea ben Elah Pekach ben Remaliah. Vayakehu v'Yamitehu v'Yimloch Tachtav b'Shnat Asum Liyotam ben Uziyahu. Okay, and he reigned at that time. So the timing works really well with the Assyrian documents as well. And in fact, it makes a lot of sense, because if Tiglath-Pileser is really overpowering the north, then how do you get a new king in there without some agreement, support, something of Tiglath-Pileser? When the new one comes in and you don't see anything at all, as we'll see in this parak, and that would indicate that initially there was some level of rebellion. So that's the history. Now, the problem with that history, with part of the history, is Pasuk Aleph, not a lot, but just the timing of it. Because we know a number of things. We know that Pekach ruled for 20 years. We know that Achaz began his reign in the 17th year of Pekach. That's Perek Tet Zayin Pasuk Aleph, which means that Achaz overlapped with Pekach for 3 years, right? If Pekach rules for 20 years and Achaz takes over in the 17th of that 20 years, there's 3 years overlap. And 3 years, when we talk about years in kings, can be 3 or 4 because there were those, they weren't always calendar years, they were regal years, which always started either at Nisan or at Tishrei, depending on what kind of king. Now, here it says that if you notice, Hoshea ben Elah takes over, okay, that in Mishnat 12 la'achaz, Melech Yudah, Malach, Hoshea ben Elah b'Shomron al Yisrael, Tesha Shanim. In the 12th year of Achaz is when Hoshea ben Elah takes over. Well, if Pekach was killed in the 3rd or 4th year of Achaz, what's happened in these intervening years? And so as a result of that, we seem to have 9 years that seem to be unaccounted for, right? 3rd or 4th year, 12th year, 8 or 9 years are missing. According to Seder Olam Rabbah, the years, okay, are not talking about the beginning of his reign. This is the end of Seder Olam Rabbah, in end of chapter 22 in Seder Olam Rabbah, that this time that he took over in the 12th year of Achaz's reign is not the beginning of his reign. Beginning of his reign was that 3rd year, 3 years overlap. And as a result of that, the Mitzudat David and the Malbim both say, okay, that he was, for the first 9 years, he was Melech Tachat Shilton Ashur. He was completely under the control of Ashur, of Assyria. And therefore, it was only after 9 years had passed did he show his independence from Assyria. Now that plays in very, very well, both in terms of history and in terms of the rest of the story. Why? Because Vayas, we'll see in a moment, Vayas hara b'nei Hashem, he did evil. This is nothing new for us to hear about the northern kings doing evil. Rak lo kemalchei Yisrael asher hayu lefanav. But he wasn't as bad as the previous kings. What does it mean he wasn't as bad as the previous kings? How does that play into this? So Rashi quotes the Medrash. This is a Seder or Eliyahu Zuta he's quoting, that when Melech Ashur, when Tiglath-Pileser had conquered the large portions of the northern kingdom, among the things he conquered and took away were the calves, the golden calves that had been established in the north and the south as alternative places of worship for the northern kingdom, to stop them from going down to Yerushalayim. If you remember, going back to the initial split, Yeravam ben Nevat had established these calves because he realized if he wanted to be viewed as a legitimate king, he had to keep his subjects away from the Beit HaMikdash. Because once you walk into the Beit HaMikdash, the king of the south, the king from the Davidic dynasty, is accorded honor. He's allowed to sit. He's the only person allowed to sit in the Beit HaMikdash. He was accorded that honor, and if the king of the north came, he would be allowed in. He's Jewish, but you might as well find him standing next to the king of the south on his throne, and he's standing, he doesn't have. So Yeravam ben Nevat had made sure that there was a way to stop the Jews from going down, and he did it in 2 ways. One was originally establishing these golden calves in the south and in the north, and he did them as not initially as alternative forms of worship, but they became alternative places of worship, probably is a better way of saying it. And then he also established guards, the Pardisaot, that were at border guards to stop people from going to the south. Rashi explains that what Hoshea did was the following. Ashur took away those golden calves. They're gold, very valuable, shows power. But the guards were still on the border. And so Hoshea got rid of the guards. What he did was he allowed Jews to go back down into Beit HaMikdash. In fact, according to the Radak, the date he did this was on Tu B'Av, on the 15th day of Av in his reign, which according to the Radak is one of the reasons that we celebrate Tu B'Av as a joyous day. Okay, if you remember, there's a number of things that happened in Tu B'Av. This is the earliest thing that happened in the course of Tu B'Av, and it is something we will celebrate. So on Tu B'Av of his reign, he went ahead and he got rid of those guards. By getting rid of those guards, he allowed the Jewish people to go south, to go back into the Beit HaMikdash. But there's a challenge when he does this. Because when he does this, and this the Medrash picks up on, Jews who no longer go to the Beit HaMikdash are choosing to no longer go into the Beit HaMikdash instead of being forced from the Beit HaMikdash. It goes from the blame being placed on the ruler to the blame being placed on the subjects. And the Midrash explains that even though he may have been better, what ends up happening is because the Jewish people don't go necessarily, they don't go in large numbers, the Jewish people are viewed as worse. And so this becomes a moment, in an unusual way, that the king is better and yet the punishment is extreme. So one of the ways, again, is it's the people. Allah, Alav Allah Shalman Eser, Melech Ashur. Shalman Eser came against him. Okay. Vayhilo Hoshea Eved Vayashev Lo Mincha. Now, we've been talking about Tiglath-Pileser all of a sudden. Where Shalmaneser comes? Well, Tiglath-Pileser dies. And if you remember, again, and going back to that chronology I had shared a moment ago, if you look at this chronology, so here's Hoshea. Tiglath-Pileser dies, according to modern scholarship, somewhere in the 4th, 5th year of Hoshea. Hoshea continues, and here's Shalmaneser. He's now the new king. He takes over. And Shalmaneser comes up against Hoshea. Now, what is against him? Well, according to the Medrash, according to Seder Olam Rabbah, it's because he had rebelled. He had stopped sending him the mincha that was supposed to be done, the necessary taxes and gifts that were supposed to be on his own, or in the terminology of the Ralbag, Hoshea Malach Ba'atzmo, he showed his independence. Vayhilo Hoshea Eved, and Hoshea becomes his servant, Vayashev Lo Mincha, and he starts sending the mincha. Vayimtza Melech Ashur v'Hoshea Kesher, but Melech Ashur sees that there's a plot going on. There's some kind of plot. Asher Shalach Malachim El So Melech Mitzrayim. He found out that the northern kingdom under Hoshea was trying to create a coalition with Egypt. And when he found this out, all of a sudden he wasn't sending him the necessary tributes. And he was arrested, he was shackled, and he was placed in jail. In other words, the king of Israel is now arrested by the king of Assyria. What's going on here? So first of all, we know that Egypt is, again, a major power. Assyria is the rising power, but Egypt has been a major power. Just as Pekach ben Remaliah had reached out to Egypt before, now his successor, Hoshea, reaches out to Egypt. So Melech Mitzrayim, we don't know what So really is. There's no Egyptian king with the name So. There's like 4 different theories on what this is. It may be the name of a place. It may be a mispronunciation of some title, of some name. We don't know what it is, but we do know that it says that he reached out to the king of Egypt. And when Shalmaneser V found out about this, he got him. Now, how did he get him? Okay, what really happens? Okay, he went, according to Chazal, he went to Shalmaneser to try to appease him in some way. Instead of appeasing him, he was arrested at that time. We don't see an attack on Shomron. He must have warned him in some way. And in fact, there are documents, Assyrian documents as well, which would seem to support this as well. Vayal Melech Ashur B'chol Haaretz. And then the king of Assyria, Shalmaneser V, attacks the north. Vayal Shomron. And he goes up against the capital city of Shomron, Vayatzar aleh shalosh shanim, and he places it under siege for 3 years. The this idea of placing a siege in documents from the Assyrian documents, we know he did the same thing with Tyre, that when it wasn't easy to conquer, they placed siege around it, and they were able then to ultimately overtake that city. Bishnat HaTshi'it LeHoshea, Lachad Melech Ashur et Shomron. And it was in the 9th year, and the king had besieged Shomron, Vayegel et Yisrael Ashur. And then he exiled Israel to Ashur, Vayoshev Otam Bachlach Uvechavor Nahar Gozan Ve'are Madai. And he transferred them to various places, as he would do, as his father had done, doing this transfer of populations. So just to look at the map for a second, again, I sent this to you. He took them, okay, here is, Shomron is down here. Actually, the bottom of that box is Shomron. And he took, and Shalmaneser comes from his area, and he attacks them, and he takes them to a number of different places. All the way, Madai is off the map. It would be like up here, is the furthest place he takes them. Chalachach, if you notice, is right here. And he takes them to Chavor, which is right here. And Nahar Gozen is actually this river, which is inside that area. It's a tributary into the Nahar Prat. And then Are Madai is off to all the way over to the east. That's where he takes the Jews. Now, it's a fascinating thing because according to his documents himself, we know the number of people he claims to have exiled. There are two variations on this number. Within about 100 people, 27,900 people he exiled. Now, 27,900 people is not a lot of people. It's a lot of people, but doesn't sound like he exiled the entire northern kingdom. So what really happened? So on this, I actually shared with you a brief article that is on the 929 website from Rav Yoel Ben Nun. Rav Yoel Ben Nun is a great Tanakh scholar. He's a big Talmud Chacham. He was in the first machzor of Yeshivat Har Etzion. He was both the first group of students at Yeshivat Har Etzion when Rav Amital started it after the 6-Day War, and he also taught at that same time as well. We had a privilege of having him at Kins teach one Sunday morning about probably close to 20 years ago. And he very creative. And to him, by the way, a lot of the modern religious scholarship of Tanakh can really be traced back to a lot of the things that Yoel Ben Nun did. He's still teaching. Yoel Ben Nun writes, and I'm just going to read it, and because it's good, I'll translate it along the way. He writes, I left off this one piece. We know by the documents, by the Assyrian documents, the Shalmaneser V died during those 3 years of siege, right near the end of the siege, and Sargon took over after him. Sargon is the one whose image is in the Oriental Institute and many other places. So where did Sargon take them? At Shuvot Maftiot, the answers are really very surprising. Shalmaneser V, Tsar al-Shomron, okay, Shalmaneser placed a siege over Shomron, Aval Sargon Lachadotim, but actually was actually conquered by Sargon. Interestingly, if you look back in the Pasuk, and this is what I was referring to earlier, if you notice, when it comes to Pasuk Hey and Pasuk Vav, we don't talk about who the king of Ashur was. We just say Melech Ashur. So it's very possible that we're not mentioning who the king was because it just wasn't as necessary to the story, but it could have been Sargon just as well. Higla, 27,290. Okay, that's one of the numbers that are given. There are, again, a couple of sets of numbers that are given in terms of the number of people who were actually exiled, but within about, the other is 27,900. He took from 27,000 people and he transferred them over to Assyria. And he went ahead and he brought other people from other conquered lands into the north. Okay, regarding the remnants of the Jewish people from the north, he shirat nachlatam. He left their areas, but he taxed them very heavily. כך כתב סרגון בכתובת האהבה שלו וגם ברשימות הנעלים השותפות. And this is actually what Sargon wrote in his victories, like the bragging documents, and also in the annals that are all over. אינני יודע מדוע בתיאור המקראי סרגון לא נזכר. Yoel ben Nun says, I don't know why Sargon's not mentioned. אבל הכתוב מדייק, but if you look real carefully, it says in the text, Alas Shalmaneser melech Ashur al Shomron v'yatzar elam. Okay, it says that Shalmaneser was the one who actually, okay, placed siege over Shomron. Vayilkedua vayagel melech Ashur Yisrael Ashur. But then it says that the king of Ashur exiled them, and it doesn't mention Shalmaneser, so it works. Barur gam shehitmotatut hashilton Yisraeli b'Shomron v'haglayat amudei hatevach, and it's clear that by the falling apart of the government and the mainstays of the people who were taken into exile, garmu levricha hamonit shel Yisrael, caused many Jews to flee. Hachafirot shel Nachman Avigad, the Bir HaElyonah shel Yerushalayim, for example, Nachman Avigad, a famous archaeologist, who excavated the upper city of Yerushalayim, of Ir David, Heru Gidul Mashmuti Ma'od B'Shetach HaBanui shel Yerushalayim B'Met Chizkiyahu, saw that there was a great amount of building going on in the time of Chizkiyahu. He's the next king. If you remember, at this time of this Galut is already Chizkiyahu's time. And it's apparently it would make sense to say that many from the north actually fled into the south, and that's why there was an explosion of building around Yerushalayim. And it's also pretty clear, whether it's in the Navi or it's in the documents, that a lot of Jews stayed in the area of Ephraim and Manasseh. And even in the north, the Galil, and even on Transjordan in the Gilad. There are three different places we can prove this from the text. The first one is when Chizkiyahu reestablished the Pesach celebration in his time, he actually sent messengers to the north. And Divrei Yamim says the people from Asher, Menashe, and Zvulun came. In other words, those were some of the 3 of the 10 tribes. Yoshiao, King Yoshiao, Tirat Avodat Elulim Me'arei Menashe Ephraim Shimon Ba'ad Naphtali. And we also see the Yoshiao, a later king, also purified the Avodat Elulim from cities with Menashe, Ephraim, Shimon, and Naphtali. And 3, this is a very famous story from Yirmiyahu, that 80 men, Mishchem, Mishilo, Mishomron, from the north, they were the ones, the people from the north were coming down to the Beit HaMikdash when they encountered the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, as recorded in the book of Yirmiyahu. So we see there were Jews in the northern kingdom, and they maintained identity as Jews in the northern kingdom. Gam ben ha'olim, also when it comes to the question of those who had come back to Israel, B'Shivat Zion, during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, Hayu Rabim Mishivtei Yisrael. There were a lot of people from the 10 tribes, because the people from the southern kingdom who came back with Ezra were only 30,000. We took 42,360 Olei HaGolam from the other people who came back. So in other words, there were 12,360 people who are really not accounted for as being people from the south who came back for the time of the Second Temple. That means the Aseret HaShvatim were not lost. And among us today live people from all 12 tribes. What basically happened, in other words, at this point, and this is the fascinating piece of this, which he writes just beautifully in terms of a summary. What happens is that at this time, there is very simply a situation taking place that that the leadership, the city of Shomron, are gone. They're exiled, maybe some people around, It's a large number of exiles, but it was not all of the people of the North. It was a select group of the people of the North, and there were a lot more people left. We didn't lose the 10 tribes. There are members of the 10 tribes who lost their identity. By the way, there are members of the 2 tribes of the South who lost their identity. Assimilation is a terrible thing. We find it nowadays. A lot of people assimilated. After they're brought out into Ashur, into Assyria, we lost them. That's 100% true. However, at the very same time, when we lost them, some of them still were around, and today they're with us, which is one of the theories of why we are called Jews. Because Jews come from the word Judah, Yehuda, Yehudim, right? And what happened was, even Yehuda lost its definition as a unique tribe. It became defined as those Jews who were not Kohanim and Levim. Everybody else was called a Yehudi. Why again? Because if you remember, when they start going down to the south from the north, that explosion of building Yerushalayim at that time, they take on a new identity. It's not that they're losing their tribal identity, but their identity becomes one that is governed more politically or even geographically. They're Yehudim, the people who are staying in the tribe of Yehuda. And so we are Jews because of the exile of members of the 10 tribes. That's it's a great background, and it's a wonderful way of understanding a difficult concept of what really was going on. Let's continue in terms of the Navi. Now, the Navi now takes a very interesting turn. And for the next 16 psukim, 17 psukim actually, 16 psukim, it's going to go and explain why all of this happened. It becomes from a historical record into this is a word of musar, of ethical and understanding of what was behind everything. And the Navi uses fascinating terms. He wants to explain why the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed and what happened, why they went ahead, and the punishment was actually exile. The Abarbanel says that we need to understand from this that God was the Redeemer who brought about the Geulah. We were redeemed and brought into Eretz Yisrael. So if we're going to be punished, the punishment is to be taken out of Eretz Yisrael. It's the midah keneged midah, the fitting justice to a person who rejects God's redemption is to be exiled. The Klei Yakar takes the position, which I mentioned earlier, that the big picture on this is that once they were able to return to Yerushalayim and once those restrictions were lifted, they didn't respond in the right way, and therefore they were punished. So Pasuk Zayin says as follows: Notice, when the Jews sinned against Hashem, their God, who took them out of Egypt. Out of Egypt is important. This is why it's a midah keneged midah. Mitachat yad Paro melech Mitzrayim, from under the rule of Paro. This is hundreds of years later. What are we bringing this up for? We're showing why Galut was the punishment. Vayiru Elohim achirim, and they feared other gods. Now, if you listen carefully in this pasuk, you hear echoes of the first 2 dibrot of the Aseret HaDibrot. Anochi Hashem Elokecha asher tzorticha me'eretz Mitzrayim, right? You see also Lo Yelecha Elohim achirim al panai. You see this, and it's not by accident. The Navi is using words that ring true to us. This is a rejection, in other words. What the Navi is saying is they have rejected the first 2 of the Aseret HaDibrot. Let's not take this simply. This was big stuff that they did wrong. And they followed the laws of the non-Jews, Asher Horish Hashem mipnei bnei Yisrael, which God had banished or gave them the right to inherit, Umalchei Yisrael Asher Asu. And this was, according to the Mitzudot David, that this was because with the Malchei Yisrael who created Avodah Zarah. Again, if you listen to the words, we're told in Vayikra, Uvuchukoteim lo telechu, don't emulate the non-Jews. Here, Vayelchu b'chukot hagoyim. They went ahead and they emulated the other nations. So all this is saying you rejected God, you made other idols, you went ahead and began assuming almost the identity of another nation. You followed their path. Vaychab'u b'nei Yisrael dvarim asher lo chen. Vaychab'u is a word that we don't know what it means, honestly. Rashi says that ultimately it means that they faked it. Okay, they created new narratives. They lied. The Dat Mikra says that actually, and he follows the way of the Radak, that this word comes from the Shoresh Chet Pei Hey, to cover, like the word chuppah, canopy. That what they ultimately did is they covered themselves with this idea, Al Shem Elokeim, regarding God, Vayivnu lehem bamot b'chol arehem, and they built altars in all of their cities, Mimigdal Notzarim ad Ir Mivtzar, from the Migdal Notzarim until the Ir Mivtzar. What is Migdal Notzarim? Migdal Notzarim is a watchman's shack, or a watchman's probably more of a tower. It would be what was put out where the shomrim would be. It was a small, it was a fence post. It was like a post. There was a very small area, the notzar from the word, to protect. Here, they would go ahead and they would build it out there. Notzar, according to the Dat Mikra, maybe actually even less, might come from the word notel, like the person who plants. And so it may have been the guard towers that were around their vineyards and their orchards to be able to watch over that. So it goes from the smallest to the fortified cities, from the little to the big, everywhere. They built the bamot. And they went ahead and they built for themselves. They carved for themselves monuments, and they carved for them, and also they had planted asherah. Al kol giva gavoa v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan. Every high mountain and under every shady tree. Again, quoting, this is a quote from Chumash, from the Varim Yud Bet. Al harim aramim v'al v'tachat kol eitz ra'anan. We are warned against this. Vayakteru sham b'chol bamot, and they offered offerings on all of these altars. They did. Everything they did was ultimately, according to the Abarbanel, lahachis v'lo l'tavon. It was to provoke God. Because if you think about it for a minute, you don't need to do that many offerings. You don't need to do it everywhere. This was a sign of rebellion, says the Abarbanel. Kagoyim asher hegla Hashem mipnehem. They acted just like the nations that God had exiled. Again, you act like the nations God had exiled, then you're going to deserve exile. Everything they did was lahachis, was just to anger God. And they worshipped the idols. This is a very strong pejorative term for an idol, which God had told them not to do. Vayad Hashem b'Yisrael u'v'Yehuda, and God warned them. Vayad is from the word edut. In the north and the south, which is a very strange thing. Why are we bringing in the south all of a sudden? And so one theory that I came across in the Olam HaTanakh suggests that we need to remember that Yirmiyahu Hanavi was the one who wrote Sefer Melachim. Yirmiyahu Hanavi lived at the time of the destruction of the second temple, about 150 years later. And when he lived at the time of the second destruction, he's watching the same things that happened of the north happening in the south. And so when he's reporting on what's happening in the north, it also rings true for the south for him. And it may be why Yehuda is in there. Now, you could also answer that at this time, the king of the south is not such a good king. Okay, but it's Achaz. But it doesn't seem like the south had gone that bad yet. So it might be why they're including it. And yeah.
If people do something to anger God, that evidences some belief in God. I can't do something to anger God if I didn't believe in him. Now, if I believed in God, why would I do something to anger him? I know his power. I mean, there's a problem here practically.
Well, so it's a great, not only is it a great question, it's a great segue to something, which we'll see a little bit later. First of all, people lie to themselves all the time. Okay, we do things that we know are wrong, but we justify them all the time. So the fact why people would do things that are dumb, people do it. So I'm not that troubled by it. Okay, but one of the interesting things is that they may still have, by all indication, they still believed in God, but they were forming what we would refer to in Hebrew as shituf. That there was, okay, God's my boss, but I got these other guys. Or you'd start taking things out of proportion, who's in charge and who's not. That kind of worship is also prohibited. So it could be as simple as they're being dumb. People being dumb is not a chiddush. Okay, we see it unfortunately every day. Just watch the news. Okay. On the other hand, it may be that they were feeling somewhat justified that maybe they weren't fully rejecting everything, even though we see, when Yeravim cut it off, he cut off access to the Beit HaMikdash, right? So that was a rejection. It could be both. I'm too familiar with people doing things that are wrong, unfortunately.
This is super duper dumb.
Yeah. But by the way, super duper dumb doesn't take a lot of effort. It takes just getting used to it. Look, I'll give you an example. Okay, a very strange example. Okay, and I kind of wish this wasn't being recorded, but let's move on a little bit. Okay, and we'll see what he says actually. Vayad Hashem b'Yisrael, and God had warned, said Rashi, the Jewish people, Uvi Yehuda and Yehuda, biyad kol nevi'ei kol chozeh lemor. Through the prophets of Kol Chozeh, the prophets, okay, according to who had given prophecy. Rashi says Kol Chazon, okay, as he solves it, why we have both a Navi and a Chozeh. A Navi is a prophet, a Chozeh is a seer. They're really synonyms. Why would we use it? So Rashi says the word Chozeh is actually the prophecy, as opposed to the prophet seer. Okay, the Ralbag says, okay, that ultimately he warned us through all of the prophets who saw God in dreams. This is Baspaklaria She'ena Me'ira, and also in every Chozeh who saw it clearly. So the Ralbag says, no, we're talking about two classes of prophets, lower and higher prophets.
Can I ask a second? Were there also Nevi'ei Sheker during this time that perhaps were, getting the people off course? It wasn't
Definitely.
only.
There were Nevi'ei Sheker. There were also, if you remember, there were Kohanei Sheker, which we'll get into in a moment. But the Nevi'ei Emet is the Kol Navi and Kol Chozeh. Shuvu midarkechem hara'im v'shimru mitzvotai chukotai kechol haTorah. They kept on yelling at him, keep the Torah. Asher tziviti et avotechem, which I had commanded to your forefathers, v'asher shalachti alechem biyad avadai hanavim, that I gave to you. So the Nevi'im kept on giving Musar. They kept on saying, stop this, keep the Torah. V'lo shameu. They didn't listen. Vayakshu et orpam ke'oref avotam. And they got stubborn like their forefathers. Now, stubborn like their forefathers, asher lo eminu b'Hashem Elokeinu, who didn't believe in God. We are identified as an am kshei oref. We are very stubborn people. Now, part of that stubbornness is good for us. That's how we've survived. But the kshei oref is a complicated piece. The Chatam Sofer is one of my favorite Chatam Sofers, or as some of you may know him as the Chassam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Sofer. He said, why is a stubborn person called a kshei oref, a stiff-necked person, literally? Because a stiff-necked person is not willing to turn his head around and look back and see what preceded it. If you're unwilling to learn from your past, you're a stiff-necked person. The Ibn Ezra says, okay, and the Ibn Ezra says that ultimately what it means is It's like a person that's going to say for Shmot and Ibn Ezra Lamed Bet that it's a mashal to a person. We're using this metaphor for a person who's running quickly and someone's chasing him, but he just refuses to look if the person is gaining on him. He just isn't willing to turn around like that. So we were stubborn. They despised God's chukim and his covenant, which he had entered into with their forefathers. Think, ve'im bechukotai tim asu from Sefer Vayikra. We're using those same terminologies again. Ve'et edotav asher ha'idbam ve'yelchu achrei ha'hevel ve'yibalu v'achrei ha'goyim asher svivotam asher tziva Hashem. And they went ahead and they became nothingness. Okay, not only did they speak to nothing, the hevel, the vapor, which is the way we're describing the Avodah Zarah, but they also na'asu ba'alei hevel. They were made into these kinds of people. Vayazvu et kol mitzvot Hashem Elokeim, and they left all of the mitzvot. Now with this pasuk, we're getting into not individual, but now we're talking about how terrible the nation was. Vayasu lahem masecha, and they made for themselves idols. And what was it? Shnei agalim, the two golden calves. Vayasu asheran, and they built an asheran. That's number 2. Vayishtachavu l'chol tzva shamayim, and they bowed down to all of the hosts of the heavens. Vayabdu et Baal, and they began worshiping the Baal. Now, the Eglei Masecha, the 2 golden calves, was in the time of Yeravim. That's Malachim Aleph Perek Bet. The Asherah is already in the time of Achab. If you remember, Izevel brought in the Asherah worship. That's Malachim Aleph Tet Zayin. They worship the Baal. That's in the time of Achab again. Ve'aviru et b'neihem ve'et b'notehem ba'esh, and they passed their children through the Eish. This is the worship of Molech. We have found that already in Perek Tet Zayin. Okay, that they were worshiping Molech, Vayiksemu Ksamim Vayinacheshu, and they began turning to witchcraft. It's Perek Tet, Pasuk Chaf Bet. Vayitmakru la'asot hara b'nei Hashem lahachitzo, and they found all different ways to anger God. So there were 5 major sins that these people had violated. Vayitanaf Hashem ma'od b'Yisrael, and as a result, God was angered greatly. Vayasirem al panav, and he removed them from his face. To remove from God's face means to take away the hashtacha. We talk about hester panim. This is a step beyond hester panim. God is hiding himself here. God is turning away. Rak shevet Yehuda, lo nishar rak shevet Yehuda levato. The only ones who were left under God's protection was the southern tribe of Yehuda. Gam Yehuda, now we go back to Yehuda again. Remember Yirmiyahu writing this. Gam Yehuda lo shamar et mitzvot Hashem Elokeim. Even Yehuda were not careful. Vayelchu b'chukot Yisrael asher, so they began to emulate the northern kingdom. That's, by the way the monarchy of Achaz is introduced. Ki kara Yisrael me'al Beit David, vayamlichu et Yeravam ben Nevat. And they went ahead, this northern kingdom had split off, torn themselves away from the south, and they crowned Yeravam ben Nevat. Yeah, Yafa.
That ain't the way it happened.
Right.
Because God said Yeravam is going to be king. And this is an entire Cliff's Notes of the entire history since Yeravam ben Nevat. And so where are the pieces where people did a little tshuva, and the last part where it said there were no more agalim? Like, why do this whole thing again? Was right. There no, and in the time of Hoshea ben Elah, it never said what Hoshea did wrong.
So what's interesting is, right. So first of all, in terms of this description, if you remember, okay, that the process of coronation, which goes back to Malachim Aleph Perek Yud Bet, was the Navi said he's going to do this, but then the people did it on their own without a Navi present. The people, in other words, while it is true that the initial plan was God, the people showed their own values by going forward without bringing God into this mix. And that's where the people, because we're talking about the people right now, we've switched from talking about the kings, it's always about the people, that they didn't have that level of faith that they needed to have. So that's why it would still work. But what I find even more fascinating is Yeravam ben Nevat has been this figure throughout this entire period of Malachim of the northern kingdom. We can't get past him. We keep on talking about at Asher Asa Yeravam ben Nevat, Yeravam, we keep on referring to him. He becomes this paradigm for rebelliousness. And you're right, he started out good, but he went off. And so Yeravam comes back even at the end. By Yadach Yeravam et Yisrael me'achrei Hashem v'chti'am chata'a gedola. And he pushed them away, ultimately Yeravam, creating this border guard to stop people going to Yerushalayim, creating the 2 golden calves. Vayelchu b'nei Yisrael b'chol chataot Yeravam asher asa lo saru mimenu. They never veered away from the evil of what Yeravam ben Nevat had created. Interestingly, Ad Asher Hesir Hashem et Yisrael me'al panav. They never veered away, lo saru, so God doesn't veer. Ad Asher Hesir Hashem et Yisrael me'al panav. Again, this idea of midah keneged midah, of the retribution that's appropriate. Kasher diber biyad kol avadav nevi'im, which he's spoken about via the nevi'im, vayigel Yisrael me'al mato Ashura ad hayom hazeh. And the northern tribes are exiled until this day. This is the reason. And so if you look at it, you're right, this is the Cliff Notes, okay? But within these very Cliff Notes, we see the level of what the violations of the northern kingdom have done are biblical in nature. Everything they did was warned both back in the Torah. They continued to do it. The Nevi'im kept on going back to them and telling you, don't forget about the Torah, don't forget about the Torah. And they did it, and it started almost from the beginning with Yeravam ben Nevat. I am sorry to do this, but I'm going to stop the She'ur here, primarily because the next piece, which is fascinating, is the story of the Gerei Arayot, of the people that were brought into the Northern Kingdom, and it deserves more than the 3.5 minutes that we have left to today's She'ur. So we'll pick this parak up. Yeah, Shoshi.
What's the third one? You said there were 5 things that Bnei Israel did, and you quoted where they all took place. So the
so what we have are the 5. That goes back again to Pasuk Tet Zayin and Yud Zayin. Okay, right. So it is the Shnei Agalim, the 2 calves, right? That's Yeravam, Melachim Aleph Yud Bet Pasuk Chavchet. The Asherah is Achav, actually Izevel, Melachim Aleph Tet Zayin Lamed Gimel. The Baal is Achav, Melachim Aleph Tet Zayin Lamed Aleph. The Molech is Melachim Bet Tet Zayin Pasuk Gimel. And the Ksamim, the witchcraft, okay, is Perak Tet Pasuk Chafbet.
Thanks.
Sources for them all. Okay. Thank you all. I'll see some of you in the meeting of the shul. Have a wonderful day. We'll meet next week, same time, same place.
Thank you. Tada.
Thank you.